We actually won a Japanese comedy show. I say we. His pronunciation is so poor that he has to have subtitles, and I hold the subtitles.
What's up, KoreKara Squad? Welcome back to the podcast. So this week we talked to BJ Fox, who does comedy in both Japanese and English. He owns his own comedy club. You might have seen him before on Terrace House. He had a brief appearance, and he also had several clips go viral. So we talk about his experience doing comedy in Japan, getting to a high level of Japanese, and his thoughts on comedy in Japan.
But you know what's not comedy? Absolutely destroying and smashing the like button and following us on Twitter. So go do that and let's get right into it.
Okay, so BJ Fox, can you give us a quick background of who you are and where you're at today?
I guess the top line introduction is I'm a British Tokyo-based stand-up comedian. I've been in Japan this time since 2015, when I was essentially in my real life job. I was transferred to Tokyo from Singapore. It's my second time in Japan. Speaking third time. I did it 1 year of Yugaku, 1 year of study when I was a younger man, and then I did 2 years on the JET program, and then came back to Japan when I guess I was 33. So I'm a stand-up comedian, but maybe I think you guys saw me on a brief appearance on Terrace House, where one of the one of the members of the house was trying stand-up comedy for the first time, and I emceed that gig. Maybe some other listeners might know me from, I had 4 years of a sitcom, an English language sitcom at NHK World called Home Sweet Tokyo as well. I've done a few other TV projects as well, and I guess now my main project is I've just opened a stand-up comedy club in Tokyo.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting that you came to Japan like at 33, having lived there for like cumulative 3 years before that, right?
Yeah.
So would you say you were already fluent by the time you came over the last time?
Yes and no. So after 1 year of Yugaku, I took IKKU. So I took IKKU and passed it after 1 year of not 1 year of study. I'd studied more, but 1 year of being here. So in that sense, if IKKU level 1, or I think it was called J1. This was over 20 years ago.
Now it's like the N1, right?
N1, yeah. So yeah. I took that after 1 year in ICU. So if that's an indication of fluency, then yeah, you could say I was fluent. But in reality, I rarely used Japanese after JET, and I was very much a book-led. You know, I was strong at, I knew kanji, but I had no Japanese friends, and I lived away from Japan for 10 years. Even though in those 10 years I was working for a video games company, and I had a lot of connection with Japan. I was leading the Japanese marketing, and before I came back to Japan, I was in Singapore running the Asian operations for a video game company. And maybe it's changed recently with like the rise of console gaming in China's grown a lot in the last few years. But when I was there, Japan was 50% of the market. So even though I was based in Singapore, I did a lot of work with Japan, and I would use Japanese. So yeah, so when I came back, actually, for example, like we were talking just before air that one of my comedy videos went viral with me doing comedy in Japanese. That level of Japanese that was after like 9 months of coming back.
Oh wow.
That
video was 9 months, but how soon until you were able to like do comedy and have the confidence to do comedy?
Oh, straight away, actually. Sorry, yeah.
Wow.
So straight away, yeah. Because I started doing comedy. I started doing stand-up comedy when I was living in Singapore. I guess my first gig was when I was about 33. I'm 40 now, by the way. When I was 32 in 2013, and I loved it. I was so obsessed by stand-up comedy at that stage. And then I got transferred back to Tokyo, and I guess at that stage I was worried that coming to Tokyo, there wouldn't be any opportunity to do comedy. So straight away, even before I'd arrived, I'd arranged a gig. I just contacted a bar I used to go to sometimes when I was on business trips here, saying, could I do a stand-up comedy gig in your bar? And I did that in Japanese. And by the way, it wasn't great. So in that sense, I was able to, do comedy in Japanese.
And was that your first time doing comedy in Japanese?
No, actually, it wasn't. My first ever gig in Japanese was with Bobby Judo.
Oh, no way.
With Bobby Judo, former guest of this pod. And that was actually
KoreKara podcast.
That was like 3 months before I moved. So basically, I was supposed to move to Japan in the beginning of 2015. For various admin issues related to my company, I didn't get the visa. So I had to go back to Singapore, but I'd already booked this gig in Fukuoka. And Bobby Judo, maybe either he was headlining or he was hosting, I can't remember. And I decided, even though I was back in Singapore, I thought, well, I've booked the gig. I want to make friends with the community of comedians there. Looking forward to doing the show anyway. So I went and I flew from Singapore via Vietnam to Fukuoka for a nice weekend of fun. And that was my first ever gig. Yeah, that was my first ever gig.
So what happened? Did Bobby Judo was like, all right, yeah, don't come back to Fukuoka, or what happened?
No, Bobby Judo is a very, very funny man and a nice man. No, I've got a long-standing relationship of pretty much whenever Bobby comes to Tokyo, he will do one of my English language gigs. Maybe not over the last 2 years. There have been no English language gigs. But when, Bobby talks about being Tokyo Roast Battle champion, which he was or is, but he definitely was for a long time. That would be at a gig that I would organise. Yeah, that Fukuoka trip, that was a blast, and it was an eye-opening experience of like how comedy works in Japan. Yeah.
At least one of your first times wasn't aired on TV, like on Terrace House.
Yeah. Poor Kai. That was unfortunate. I would say if anyone ever thinks about doing stand-up comedy, invite one close friend for support. Don't invite all your friends, because chances are it won't go as well as you hope. And definitely don't have it filmed on national, or not even national TV, global TV. Yeah.
And his friends couldn't understand English, I think, so they couldn't even laugh at his jokes.
Yeah. I would say that wasn't his first time. He actually did the gig the night before. He did a gig the night before as well as a rehearsal. And one of the issues is that the night before it went really well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it went really well. And I think that was part of maybe the problem. I don't want to put words into Kai's mouth, but I think maybe having gone at an open mic the night before, where it was a very supportive environment, everyone was like, yeah, this is Kai making his debut. Yeah, big round of applause. Then to the real thing, where it was more of a genuine audience. And all of a sudden, what he thought was going to go really well didn't. And then it's hard. Honestly, dying on stage is a tough business. So, yeah.
Do you think it's any different when it's a Japanese audience? Because I feel like they might be more polite and laugh versus a Western audience.
I don't think Japanese people politely laugh at comedy gigs, actually. They might politely enjoy it, they might politely smile, and they won't get annoyed, or they won't... we don't really get heckles here anyway. They won't do that. But, a Japanese language, Japanese show, and I'm not talking bands, I'm talking stand-up comedy, which is... don't really need to get into the differences really, but let's say it's not organised, and the people are coming to see a Japanese stand-up comedy. They're not like Owadai fans. Yeah, they don't necessarily laugh politely. Yeah, they naruhodo and so desu ka. But from a comedian's point of view, you don't want those either.
I guess kind of on the topic of the different types of comedy, what are your thoughts on like manzai and rakugo? Like, have you ever thought about doing that? I think there's a lot of foreigners that are doing that now as well.
Yeah, there are foreigners who do that. I've done M1 being the manzai competition here. I've done that twice. I got through one round. I would never think about really doing it seriously, just because actually it's more of a level of greediness. When I do stand up in Tokyo, I run a lot of the shows here. Now I've got my own club. I regularly do 20 minutes, 25 minutes on stage. When I've done the manzai gigs, you have to wait like 7 hours to get on stage, and you get 3 minutes, and it's just not enough. And I'm just too old to be doing that sort of thing. I'm spending a whole day for 3 minutes of comedy, where at best I'll get a naruhodo. To be honest, I think the main difference is, from my point of view, is more of a kind of systemic issue or structural issue, as opposed to like sense of humor. When you do manzai, you have to belong to an agency. You get the gigs that they give you. And as soon as you join an agency, you're a comedian. I think stand-up's a lot freer. You just rock up to an open mic and anyone can perform, really. Certainly in Tokyo, maybe it's a bit different in more developed scenes where you have to sign up for open mics. Yeah, we actually are getting quite a few Japanese comedians who are maybe feeling a bit stifled by the Japanese structure and just like coming to open mic and saying what they like to say and not having to book it in advance and stuff.
I was just gonna ask, how do you prepare for stand-up comedy? Like, do you write out specifically the jokes that you're gonna say if you're talking for 25 minutes, or do you just kind of free flow and tell the story?
No. I don't write them out, but I will know what I'm saying. I know the beginning and the end point. A 25-minute set will be made up of smaller bits that I've practiced on a number of times. Typically the way for example in Tokyo, the way we structure it is Mondays and Thursdays are open mics. Wednesday you might do 10 minutes, and Friday you might get 15 to 20 minutes, and the joke will hopefully move from being on an open mic, polished up, get onto a Wednesday, then finally become part of the main set on the weekend. So even though I don't write it out, maybe I write it out at the beginning, but when it's coming to the end, I'm just like, okay, I'm going to talk about this topic. I'm going to talk about, let's say, konbinis. I'm going to talk about favorite food. I'm going to talk about I said konbinis. I don't actually have a konbini joke, but and then just like have these points that I'll swing to from here to there, and that's the way it works. I do a lot of comedy with a Dutch gentleman, a singer-songwriter called Ruben VM. Very funny. Check out his musical comedy on YouTube. But we actually won a Japanese comedy show on TV. I say we. His Japanese is so poor that he can speak Japanese, but his pronunciation is so poor that he has to have subtitles. So I hold the subtitles. So he sings and I'm holding the subtitle, and we use that kind of real estate on the stage, these flip charts, so we can make extra jokes. But that was an interesting experience of doing Japanese comedy, where he wrote a Japanese song, then we turn up to the show. We practiced it a number of times in front of Japanese audiences, and then the Japanese comedy writers like, no, you have to change this, it won't work.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it won't work. Japanese people don't like this, won't find this funny. And actually he refused. He stood up and he said, then we won't do it. And then they let us into the competition. Still, I think they just needed some diversity there. In the end, he won, but it did kind of show like how I felt from our point of view. Japanese comedy comes from you. You have something you want to say. The originality is so important. I think Manzai, the idea that a Japanese comedy writer was just going to rewrite our song and make it funnier. And maybe even if it was funny, I don't think Ruben would want to sing it anyway, because it's not his song anymore. And I think that's maybe a difference. Whereas a lot of the Japanese comedy, even in the Manzai, typically, one member of the team will write the comedy and another person will perform it with them. And I guess from my kind of stand-up point of view, I don't know why you would ever want to do that. Why you would be happy. You'd become an actor then. I guess I've done some acting, so that's the same thing. But yeah, so I think that's one difference as well.
Wow, we should have asked this to Nick when he came on the podcast. Like, hey, you're just an actor, huh? You're not a comedian anymore.
So I'm friends with Nick. I'm friends with Nick Norton as well, and I think he's got a very pragmatic, stroke maybe cynical view of Japanese comedy as well. Actually, I've been speaking to him for a while, but I don't know where he is at. He's doing so many other things as well. I don't know where he is with his comedy journey at the moment. I do a lot of work with a Japanese comedian called Munamoto Daisuke, who's part of a duo called Woman Rush Hour. The reason I've worked with him is because he wants to do stand-up. And honestly, you look at his Manzai, he will do 95% of the speaking and his partner will do 5%. And I do look at that and I'm like, where is the satisfaction in that? Why would you dedicate your life to standing next to someone else speaking? But I don't know, whatever works, whatever.
Yeah, for quick context, Nick is being a Chad right now. That is his life duty currently.
Okay. I know he's gone like heavy into the English. So I don't know why we talk about Nick on my podcast. But I know he's doing. All
right. We don't need to talk about Nick anymore. He has his own podcast. He can go. We know what he's up to. That's it. We don't need to hear anymore.
But he used to do a podcast called Big in Japan, or maybe Little in Japan, and I sometimes would host that as well with them.
So you don't remember which one it is? It's a big or a little?
I think they changed it midway. That's why. They changed it. They changed it midway.
Where do you think they started at? What did they start at little? That they're like, oh no, we gotta go big, or they're like, oh, this is not working out. We're little guys.
I think they started. Maybe I'm getting this wrong. I imagine they started at big in Japan. They then realized actually the inherent humor of saying little in Japan is way funnier, and also probably more accurate. Like when there is a view that people have, even like my friends at home, like let's say I had a sitcom on NHK for 4 years, am I big in Japan? No one knows who I am. You think, as a foreigner, sometimes you hit these levels of success in Japan and you think, oh, it's gonna be life-changing, and the reality is nothing. No, sorry, that's so way more depressing. It is something, but it's not life-changing in any way.
Yeah, guys, make sure to go pull up to the open mics. Don't let this hinder you. You're gonna be big in Japan, just in a not as big way, but don't worry.
For me, in doing stand-up, the goal is to do stand-up. The goal is not necessarily to become famous. I like it as a hobby. I like doing it with my friends. Maybe now I've opened a comedy bar. I'm trying to make it something. It's a comedy bar, sorry, a comedy club. I've been in Japan too long. It's hopefully becoming more sustainable. But yeah, the goal is not to become famous. And I think if your goal is to become famous, then that's opening a pathway to disappointment. And that's everything in life. Don't aim to be happy. Don't aim to be rich. Aim to be happy. And hopefully the money will come in later. Yeah.
You said you met so many friends. So is that kind of how you organize your shows? You have a lot of friends, or like you mentioned, people make the main show from the open mics?
Well, no, so I came here back in 2015. Yeah, and I don't make the shows with my friends, but over the time, those people I do the shows with have become very good friends. And the club itself was a decision post-COVID of 4 of us who are the main performers, not the main performers, but some of the main performers, to just say, okay, if we're going to come back, we haven't done a show in 2 years. Are we going to come back and be doing we were doing 5 to 6 shows a week before COVID, but different places every time. We do a show in Yokohama, show in Roppongi, show in Shimokitazawa. Does a lot of work organising, and also getting paid in free drinks and pizza. So the decision, as we've all got a bit older and coming back after COVID, how do we want to come back? And we decided to do it ourselves. But essentially it's a community of 30 to 40, I was going to say foreigners, but not necessarily, like Japanese comedians as well, who like to perform stand-up. And we try to create a circuit where new people can get involved, can improve, practice, and move up slowly and get exposed to bigger shows as much as possible. Yeah, but over time, it's so all-consuming. These people have become my good friends, and Bobby Judo, was part of that community, albeit he is based in Fukuoka or Saga, wherever it is. Yeah,
maybe we need to go into the comedy circuit once we get a trip over to Japan. Maybe we don't record the first comedy gig, but we may or may not have to do something at your comedy club.
We just take it over.
we did. I've got a podcast as well, and we did a live recording of the podcast last week in the club, and it was great fun. Way. Yeah, so it was great fun. So yeah, more than welcome.
I guess having met so many comedians, foreigner or not, famous or not, are there people that you think are the peak comedic geniuses?
Yeah, it's a hard question. We've got some good talent, I would say, in Tokyo, and there's one gentleman called John Sabai. He's a Filipino Texan, who works with us, and I would say he's got something you can't bottle up. He's got something that I can't understand, but it works every single time. And I've worked, but then it went back in the day, back in the glory days of 2019, when borders were open, and we'd get. We had Jim Gaffigan just rock up for a show once. We've had Hannibal Buress rock up for a show, literally in a tiny little, not in our club because we were doing it in other places then, and when you see people like that close up doing their magic, actually it works 2 ways. One, you're like, wow, they're a genius. And the other thing is why am I bothering? Why? They're so much better than we are. They're so much better. We have got some good people. And equally, I've done some there's a Japanese lady called Yurian Retriever. You might have seen her perform on America's Got Talent.
I think I do know who you're talking about.
She kind of performed in a bikini, a Stars Night bikini, America's Got Talent. Anyway, we did an English show. She came to an English show with us. That was interesting for me as well, because not fluent in English, strong enough English, but not fluent. Mm-hmm. And yet somehow whatever she's got transcends the language barrier. When you talk about Japanese sense of humor, Western sense of humor, whether those things even exist, that lady can transcend that with body language, and it was just genuinely very funny.
Was the body language, did that have anything to do with the bikini?
No, she's the body. I think if you look at the Americans Got Talent clip, it's not particularly funny, and it's also not representative of what she does either on stage. Her actual stand-up was more traditional stand-up, but with interesting physicality. Kind of expanding on the jokes there. Yeah,
I think Dogen is also kind of transcending. He's telling in Japanese to a Western audience. I feel
love Dogen. Yeah, genuinely very funny, super niche.
How would you kind of come up with your own jokes? Because you mentioned Dogens are pretty niche, right? So how would you categorize your own jokes, and what's your thought process behind coming up with them?
Not very interesting. Essentially, when I say something that makes my wife laugh, that is it. That is genuinely the genesis of most of my jokes. I say something that my wife laughs at, and I'm like, okay, hold that thought, and I write it down. Oh, that's one thing. My jokes are pretty niche as well, actually, I would say. And I also don't like pandering to an audience. I believe if you do something that you think is funny, in the end it should work, and you should persevere with that. But for example, my Japanese jokes essentially, even like the video that went viral. So when I say viral, I'm not talking like Dorgan level virality. I think it got like 300k views. That is essentially me talking about colonization in Singapore. I haven't adapted that at all for a Japanese market. I'm just doing essentially, when I left Singapore in 2015, I had like a farewell show, and I just translated that show into Japanese, and talking about the Merlion, talking about like the pressures I feel living in a country that the British Empire formerly colonized, and what that means in terms of representing your people out overseas. This is all like slightly fake intelligent chat to like line up a load of gags, but essentially fairly niche stuff, but say it with a good rhythm and with passion, and people will listen.
But now is that time that we have been leading up to here. BJ Fox, I know you've had a long journey here, all the way through Singapore. You've had an entire comedy journey, going to Japan 3 times, and now you're here for the long run. And I know this entire time you've been really crafting this one message, this KoreKara message. You've been making a lot of jokes, but none bigger than this. This is not a joke, by the way. This is not a joke, but I know it's time. And I heard something a little bit earlier that this might be in Japanese. It might be in native Japanese, who knows? But I'm going to go and put you on the spot, BJ Fox. Here it is. Let's hear what the KoreKara message is today.
ということで、日本語でこれからのメッセージ。これからポッドキャストの視聴者の皆様。Okay, I'll give it up. That's it. That's my Japanese. I'm out. I'm out.
Perfect.
Amazing. There we go.
Can I just also say that's probably the first time I've spoken Japanese in about 7 days. Yeah.
No better place to do it than the KoreKara podcast.
Can I say in English though? What quickly to say? I just do feel that there's many ways to come to Japan. Like I came here in 2015, essentially I had a corporate career. And I got transferred. Using Japanese to that level, if you can have the other skills as well with a bit of Japanese, you can go quite far. And I do feel that if you sometimes try to adapt too hard, it can actually limit you.
Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of the podcast. Comment down below if you saw that episode of Terrace House that BJ Fox was on.
But of course, we got to go shout out our patrons: Cedric, Jimmy, Faraz, Kevin, Alan, Darren, Drew, Jack, Joey, K, Shiny, Meredith, MKSXN, Polar, Suzu, Yui, and Sad Boy.